So let's back up a second before we talk about how they're different. Let's talk a bit about how they're the same. I want to mention that the basic approach to investigating a vehicle fire is it's the same as with any other fire claim, really. Although the ignition sources and the fuels we have to consider as part of our investigation with a vehicle fire are a bit different. The scientific principles of how a fire behaves and how we conduct our investigation is essentially the same. Now, our primary reference in fire investigation is NFPA 921, and that's the Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigations. It's issued by the National Fire Protection Association. It covers the importance of using a systematic approach, and ours is based on the scientific method. Now, we could spend hours, a lot of boring hours, I'm sure, talking about the scientific method and how it applies to fire investigation, but basically, it provides a framework for finding a solution to a problem, right? So the problem in this case is that a fire has occurred. We need to identify the cause of it. And by using our methodology consistently across any fire we investigate, we're challenging ourselves as investigators to develop conclusions that are unbiased and supported by the evidence that's available to us, right? So in those ways, there's not really a difference between a vehicle and a structural fire investigation. But back to your question about how they're different, one of our biggest challenges with a vehicle fire it stems from the fact that most everything on a vehicle will burn or melt relatively quickly. So we live in an age where vehicles are designed for efficiency, and so they make a lot of those components are made out of fiberglass and aluminum. So everything burns, melts, it gets destroyed. So if a fire isn't extinguished relatively soon after it starts, there's a real chance of it being destroyed to the point that conclusively identifying what the cause of the fire was becomes nearly impossible, if not at least challenging. So that can also affect our ability to identify and read the fire patterns that can point us toward where the fire started. And when a component on a vehicle is fire damaged, or it might display a really nice fire pattern early on in the life cycle of the fire, but later, once that component gets destroyed or melted down, the patterns go along with it, or the patterns go away with it. They're eliminated also. So, and then finally, another thing that really makes them different is the high number of ignition sources that we find in a relatively compact space. So when you think about a typical living room in a house and the things that could start a fire there, you might have to only consider a handful of possible causes, right? But let's say with an engine compartment fire on a vehicle, you have to consider dozens of ignition sources all in a really small area, maybe the size of a beach ball. So all those factors make it pretty challenging, or at least different from a structure fire.